Welcome to the Boundaries and Beyond podcast. My name is Dr. Ricardo Pokerol, and this is my lovely wife, Jennifer. With us is Trinity, the junkyard dog. Trinity is not...
The Thanksgiving dog today.
Yes, we're filming this close to Thanksgiving, so she's wearing her outfit. And she is not feeling particularly well, so she might be making extra noises this weekend, or this week, I should say, or for this episode. If you've never joined us before, we talk about our relationships, in particular ours, and how we work to make a relationship more meaningful and better. And it is a conversation format. We will be talking today about...
We'll be talking about emotions, and this is our episode number 4. We will be talking about emotional perspective. So my emotions versus your emotions. And sometimes that can get muddled, especially if you're really close to someone. We're also going to talk about shame and how shame drives dysfunction and addiction and just makes life miserable.
And we might not have enough time to have a full discussion on shame. We may need to make another episode on shame alone, because it's a pretty broad, I don't want to say broad, but big
Heavy.
or important talk. Yes, heavy. It's some people say medicinal.
Mm-hmm.
But shame drives a lot of behavior, especially the concept of what John Bradshaw used to refer to as toxic shame. We'll be touching up a little bit on that, and as well as what Pia referred to as carried and your own shame. It's a broad topic, but
and Pia, by Pia you mean
Pia Melody,
yeah.
And there's a number of models of emotion available. So we'll be covering one particular model, and you might hear people say differentiate between shame and guilt,
or embarrassment, even
embarrassment, and those sometimes the definition changes from one emotion model to the other. And the other emotion that we really want to talk about is love, especially when we're talking about couples. We want to talk about love, but we may not get too much into it during this particular episode, so stay tuned. If you haven't listened to our Boundaries episode, which is episode number 2, season 1, episode 2, I know that can be also a heavy topic. We will be touching back and forth on that, but we do recommend that you at least get an idea of what we mean by boundaries.
All right.
Okay. So do you have any other comments here?
I just want to remind everyone, since we're new and we're trying to get a lot of traction, we'd really like to ask you to share with all of those people that could learn about boundaries, and subscribe so you'll get to hear more from us, and hit that bell button so you'll get notifications.
And as I learned in our last episode, the bell button is the button in the shape of a bell.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
You're so tech savvy, honey.
I am. And I'm learning.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're listening and you don't have video, we are going to be covering emotions, and I'll have a chart available as we go. And let's show the chart. So here you can see the chart of the 8 basic emotions. So these are the most basic emotions that we experience, and all other more complex emotions are some kind of combination of these. And for example, there is, let me give you an example. Love. A lot of people think that love is also jealousy, but jealousy is more a combination of anger and fear and passion, rather than love. Love is a very positive emotion, so jealousy is a negative emotion. So that's just to give you an idea of how these patterns work. We're not gonna torture you with with that, at least not this episode, but just so you get an idea of how the emotions work. And when we're talking about uh, uh, things like love, joy, those are positive. Those about the passion can be positive or negative. For example, sexual passion that's lust. It can be positive, but in some cases it can be negative, right?
If it's not returned, especially.
Especially if it's not returned.
Mm-hmm.
So that one, passion can go either way, but joy and love are the positive emotions. Most of the other ones tend to be negative emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, so why don't we talk a little bit about the first one? Let's go back and look at the. So
And just to, I don't know if the screen share that you have has the same, like talks about the gifts of even the.
yes, we'll come back to the gifts.
Okay.
So first, I want them to realize the emotions. So anger, as you can see there, there's types of anger, different types of anger. So resentment, irritation, or frustration.
Mm-hmm.
So those tend to be the some examples of anger.
Mm-hmm.
But in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
So rage is more of a destructive anger.
Yeah.
But what would be a constructive or a, I don't want to say positive, but
what are the gifts of anger?
Well, it's assertiveness is a type of positive anger.
Yeah.
That don't want to jump into the gifts just yet.
Okay.
That those will come. But assertiveness is a beneficial form of anger.
Mm-hmm.
And we need that assertiveness when we're talking about boundaries. Boundaries require energy. And for us to be able to set boundaries, we require that assertiveness. So that anger is necessary to set those boundaries.
Yeah, especially when if you're the type of person that's a really agreeable kind of personality.
That's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard to set boundaries for a lot of very open, agreeable people. So having that assertiveness, just a little smidgen of anger will help you to set those boundaries with people.
So because this is an important emotion for boundaries, so maybe we need to go into a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
The most basic form of boundary is saying no, is being able to say no.
Yes.
So if you or we, any of us has trouble saying no, that's the difficulty setting boundaries. And you have to be assertive enough to say no and set that boundary. On the other hand, the other end of the spectrum is rage.
Yeah.
And that's destructive in terms of boundaries. Because you essentially rip apart the other person's boundaries, whether it's physical, emotional,
unless you're
whatever.
Going after a predator or going to war, rage really should.
Right. Now we're going to another extreme. So
yeah.
So it's and if you're defending yourself physically, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been in the news. You need that to be able to survive.
Yeah.
But that's not a relational situation.
No.
So you're not, as we're talking to each other, there's no real place for rage as we're having an intimate discussion. Mm-hmm. However, if somebody breaks into the house and threatens us, threatens you, then the rage becomes a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
Right. So, that's where the distinction is. It's not. I wouldn't call it a functional, because we're not talking about relationships. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about. When we're talking about a relationship, we are talking about being vulnerable with each other. Mm-hmm. So letting down our defenses and be able to share our experience, our life, what's going on emotionally, our thoughts, etc.
Yeah. But I do want to say something in that area, and I think especially women have, not all women, but a lot of women have shame around having anger. So we need to, I've had many students that even refuse to acknowledge that they feel anger, even though their face looks angry when they're talking about certain things. So, yeah,
So that interestingly is there's shame around the anger.
yeah,
So that's called a shame bind.
yeah,
So you feel shame about being angry.
yeah.
And it's not, I mean, some men have that issue too.
Mhm.
Uh,
I think Southerners have that issue.
right. And then sometimes that can come out sideways,
Yeah,
right?
like bless her soul.
Right. And that what ends up happening, we're in the South, so we're not picking on Southern people. It's just we're actually in the South.
Yeah,
Um, but the what you're getting at is that sometimes if you're not able to express your anger in a proper way,
yeah,
like saying no, I can't do this.
mhm,
If I cannot say no, it's going to come out sideways through either manipulation or resentment or some
passive
other way.
aggression. Yeah,
Passive aggressiveness
mhm,
is a good example.
mhm,
So I'm not going to show you my anger, but I'm going to let you have it.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
mhm,
Okay. So let's go back at the list. So anger is an important emotion, especially for setting boundaries.
mhm,
Let's go over here in this chart. So resentment, irritation, frustration, but also assertiveness, especially when coupled with love. That can be anger is and love combined. That would be assertiveness.
mhm,
Okay. So what about fear? Now, there's these two right here are very important for survival.
mhm.
Fear, so apprehensiveness, feeling overwhelmed, or feeling threatened. And notice next to it that we have the physical manifestation of the emotion. So essentially, what we're looking at when you're looking at the here at anger that says all over body, that's the feeling.
Mhm.
So the feeling is the physical manifestation of an emotion.
Yeah.
So we experience a feeling, and then our body puts it together, and that's an oversimplistic way of saying it,
Mhm.
but puts it together, and then we label it an emotion.
Think of emojis for younger people or Looney Tunes. Looney Tunes was great at showing anger where, you had the steam coming out of your ears and the face would turn red. That's real. I mean, it, when you're,
Well, it's an
it's an
exaggeration. It's a
exaggeration,
caricature,
but that's how it feels when you're tuned in to your body and to your emotions, which most of us Westerners, we are not tuned into our bodies. We're tuned into our iPhones, and it's funny how we can choose an emoji to feel our feelings, but we can't really feel our feelings because we're so attached to devices. And but even before the idea of our iPhones and computers, it's just something that we don't like to admit to, having strong emotions. And when we don't admit to those, we're essentially just pushing them down, pushing them down. And eventually, they're going to, like you said, they're going to either leak out in manipulative or passive aggressive ways or health wise. It's
right.
and do you want to, you should talk about that. Like,
Yes, that's just that's a very again that's a very big topic, and I do think we need to have some. We'll have some topics on repressed emotions and health because that's a real thing.
yeah,
And by the way, that's where the concept and practice of mindfulness comes in.
yeah,
And maybe we can do a little bit of a mindfulness exercise before
yeah.
doing this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so going back to the emotions, so anger, you feel all over energy. So feel like you're revved up. You want to get up and go, and you either run or you fight or you lash out, you scream. That's the anger,
For
right?
women, we even have hot flashes.
Okay, well, I wouldn't know about the hot flashes,
Yes.
although okay, yeah, Trinity doesn't like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so and then fear, as you can see, you feel in your stomach, upper chest, and suffocation, like you can't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So that goes back to that it's a survival mechanism. You feel like you can't breathe and you gotta just escape.
Yeah.
So that's fear.
Mm-hmm.
And the experience that we have with these emotions are fight, flight, or
Freeze.
freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be talking about that a little bit more. But essentially, you want to run,
Mm-hmm.
which is fear. Do you want to escape?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to fight? Okay, that's the anger. And then you freeze. That's usually fear.
That's also fear. Yeah.
Right. So think of it this way: you're walking in the woods. All of a sudden, a big grizzly bear pops in front of you, and
Yeah.
you can't move.
Some people run. Some
Some
people
people on the run,
freeze.
but
Yeah.
the experience that we freeze is an attempt to get the animal to feel that to hopefully not see us as a threat and move on.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we end up being a meal.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, this comes from the animal kingdom. We see that
This is
that
instinctual.
right. The gazelle is run away from the cheetah catches it, the gazelle goes into that freezing mode, and either it gets eaten or the cheetah gets distracted and then the gazelle gets up and runs away. So
Mm-hmm.
that freezing that people forget about is fight, flight, or freeze
Mm-hmm.
response into a threat. So that is an important emotion, of course, for survival.
Yeah.
What's it got to do with boundaries, right? The interesting thing about talking in relationships and boundaries is that when experience fear, often we fear that our partner is going to leave us,
Mm-hmm.
and we may not want to, or we fear that we may get into a fight or a discussion because we don't know how to communicate and how to do
Mm-hmm.
what's called fair fighting. Um,
And people won't set boundaries out of fear.
Out of fear, exactly. So we freeze and not be able to tell our partner what we want, what we need.
Yeah. Or
Yep.
run away from.
Or run away,
Yeah.
divorce.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that we want to avoid. So the more we understand boundaries, the better we handle that. So pain here is sadness,
Mm-hmm.
essentially. But the very basic emotion is pain. I'm not talking about physical pain, although we can experience physical pain, but it's hurt, pity, sad, loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
Going back, we mentioned that fear of abandonment. That is that form of pain that we're scared that we're going to be abandoned, and we experience the pain, that loneliness that comes from being abandoned.
Yeah.
Right?
In an earlier episode, we talked about the babies in the Russian orphanage that literally just died out of pain from
And
being
neglect,
abandoned. Yeah. So as you get more mindful too, sadness is literally pain. That's why so many people tune out of their bodies, because they don't know what to do with the pain. And so it's just easier to tune out.
Okay, so going back to looking at our chart here, the manifestations of pain in the lower chest, the heart, it feels like a heartache. Literally feels like a heartache.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The emotional pain,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's where broken heart. Think of it if you. I remember my first broken heart when I was a teenager. It wasn't you, dear. Thank God you did not break my heart. You helped me. You helped to mend it. But the broken heart comes from that being left alone and the pain that we experience in our chest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And literally a heart attack. That's the extreme version of that, a heart attack.
Yes, and people have been shown to have heart attacks from extreme emotion.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let me skip joy. Let's go on to passion. We'll come back to joy. But passion can be positive, enthusiasm, desire, and zest.
Mm-hmm.
So why wouldn't that be negative? That is a positive emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It's just negative when it's directed in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel it all over your body. You feel energized, recharged, and you're spontaneous. So the spontaneity, that's one of the things that as a clinician, we can tell when somebody has lost interest in the things that used to bring them joy.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we can tell, okay, something's going on. And that's the old term for it is anhedonia,
Mm.
or loss of interest
Mm.
in joyful activities.
Yeah.
So we'll ask patients, what are your hobbies? Do you have any hobbies?
Mm-hmm.
And they used to have hobbies, but they don't enjoy the hobbies anymore. They stay away from the hobbies.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the things that are manifested by that loss of passion, loss of zest.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, let's keep. Okay, so that's passion. The spontaneity is it's the key on that one. By the way, let's just go back for a second on that. And it's the spontaneity. Who are the most, excuse me, who are the most spontaneous people in the world?
Children.
Children, young children.
Mm-hmm.
They're all over the place.
Yeah.
That's that spontaneity.
At least
That's
healthy children.
all that Okay, fine. So they have all this energy. They have boundless energy because that's what it takes to grow up.
Yeah.
To grow up takes a lot of energy. So they have that. And we don't want to dampen that on children, but we want them to be able to control it. And that's where maturity comes in. They're able to channel that passion rather than, we don't want to put so much dampen on their passion that they lose it.
But we also don't want them having tantrums in the middle of the street.
Right. That's not exactly passion, but that's more rage and
Sure.
that kind of stuff. But the passion is the spontaneity,
Yeah.
the desire to go and play.
Where they get giddy and everything
And they
excites
laugh,
them.
right? And everything that they have, everything is wondrous.
Yeah.
Okay, we think of a child in Disneyland. All of a sudden, they're full of spontaneity,
Mm-hmm.
and that's beautiful. But you don't want them to be spontaneous in the middle of church.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? They have to be able. They have to learn to behave,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when we get into parenting, we'll talk a little bit more about what the ways to do that. Okay. The other, we'll come back to love again. That's a positive emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and then let's talk about shame and guilt.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people refer to shame as, so they differentiate between shame and guilt, and they usually use terms like guilt is more like remorse, like I made a mistake,
Mm-hmm.
and then shame is like I am a mistake.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. I think that's not how that works.
Mm.
But and I've heard it the other way around, that some people switch the shame and the guilt that way as well.
Yeah, I have to.
So that's why it's important to try and define them. So guilt is more of remorse.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when you violate some kind of
Values,
some principle,
ethics.
right? That's guilt. In a way, it's not exactly a mistake, because if I have a glass of water and I drop it, that's a mistake, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
that's not guilt.
Yeah.
Now, if I hurt somebody in the process, I may feel guilty.
Guilt is your 16-year-old, you're teaching them to drive, they run a red light and you freak out and yell stop and hurt and give them a lecture, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I'm going overboard. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you jumped over several things there,
Yeah.
but the main thing about guilt is that you're violating your own core principles.
Yeah.
That's when you experience guilt. And let's look at the physical manifestations of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a gnawing sensation in the gut.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a sense, sometimes we feel like it's like we're going to throw up.
Mm-hmm.
Although that's a little bit more shame. We can have shame and guilt together,
Mm-hmm.
but it's more that sensation in the gut. So if you know you did something that goes against your principles, that's guilt.
Yeah.
And it could be accidental too. And I
Yeah.
don't mean by like dropping the glass. It's like you didn't realize you're in the process of doing that,
Yeah.
or you accidentally, like I'm sorry, Trinity's fallen asleep.
Oh,
Uh, she's head bobbing over there, and so
guilt is, here's a good example. Like I stepped on Cheyenne's foot not too long ago.
that's her dog.
Went screaming, yelp, yelp. I felt so horrible.
And it was an accident.
It was an accident, but and how do you tell your dog you're sorry?
Right. But at the same time, your principle is do no harm. You don't want to harm another, you don't want to harm the animal. But even though it was an accident, you still feel guilty because
she's limping and
well, because you violated that principle.
Yeah.
So that's guilt.
Yeah.
And then let's go back and look at shame here. So shame is embarrassed and humble, right? So that it's embarrassment. And the sensation is like you have flushing in the face, neck, upper chest. You feel warm, hot, and this sounds like your hot flashes actually.
Yeah.
So here's the way to tell the difference. So shame is an emotion that tells us that we're human. So this is a very important emotion in terms of how we view ourselves. We are not superior to other people. We are prone to making mistakes. And that's what shame tells us. So when we experience our fallibility as humans, that's when that emotion comes into play. And it also comes into play when it's witnessed. So, for example, this is one example. If I go in the bathroom and I pick my nose, I know. Just guys talk like this, okay? Just
or when okay, I'm not going to go into.
So, I go and pick my nose in the bathroom.
Yeah.
Then I feel relief. On the other hand, if I am doing it in public, if I'm picking my nose in public, then that's when I feel shame, right?
You should.
Huh?
You should.
Right. And that's when the emotion comes in. So I'm embarrassed. Let's say I'm doing it in the middle of a podcast and I don't think the camera is catching me and I pick my nose and all of a sudden the camera comes at me.
Now I'm ashamed.
Right. Now that's the shame. Okay. Now that doesn't violate any core principles. You didn't do anything wrong per se, but you did something that most people would say that's embarrassing, but is not wrong. You're not going to go to jail for something like that. Right. So that's the difference between the guilt and the shame. And shame becomes a problem. And this is what John Bradshaw referred to as toxic shame, is when I go from I'm human, I made a mistake to I am a mistake. That's when that changes. And that's where we have to be careful in recognizing the difference between toxic shame and what some people, well, he used the term healthy shame. And then I had people, when I talk about healthy shame, referencing John Bradshaw's work, I've had people tell me there's no such thing as healthy shame, and that's not true. I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah.
Not even close. So that means that if there's no such thing as healthy shame, then
I can do anything.
Right. Then shamelessness is a good thing.
Yeah.
It reminds me, I don't think you ever saw that show.
That gives people with the dark triad
Right. That's narcissism.
The power to abuse.
Right. That's the narcissism that comes. But I was going to say there's a show called Shameless.
Yeah.
Did you see that show? I don't think you ever saw.
No,
You heard about it?
No, I watched
a couple of episodes.
Walk through as you were watching it.
Oh, I see. Okay. So anyway, our audience members probably remember this. I think it was on HBO, but
I think it was too shameless.
Right. But it was. I thought it was funny, but it was very interesting how most of the people on that show are shameless.
Oh yeah.
And the
few scenes that I saw were pretty.
Yeah, they were shameless.
Yeah.
And the important association that at least I saw on that show is that it's very strongly associated with dysfunctional families. So shamelessness is not a healthy emotion, or lack of shame is not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the other thing is that shame is a deterrent. So I mentioned picking my nose in public. I don't want to experience that awful shame
Mm-hmm.
that comes from that. So I'm not going to engage that behavior in public.
Mm-hmm. So what's the difference between that shame that you should have for doing something embarrassing versus the shame you should have for beating your child or uh, doing drugs shamelessly? What's the
Okay.
difference?
So I think what you're saying is the shame that comes from, at the same time, violating the core principles. So you're experiencing shame and guilt.
Okay, so that would
So,
be a
right.
combination.
So you don't have to know. If I do something that violates my principle and nobody knows about it, I'm still going to feel guilty. I'm going to feel that remorse, or I should feel that remorse.
Okay, so it's guilt that you would feel if you were doing something egregious.
Right. But then if it's exposed,
Okay,
then there's shame
on top of it.
on top of the guilt.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So those are and that's a very good example that
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people listening probably had that exact same question.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, feel free to write comments and questions, and we'll try to answer them in either future episodes or do a Q&A on other episodes. So, so that was a very good point.
Mm-hmm.
We can experience both the guilt and the shame,
Mm-hmm.
but technically, if nobody knows about something we did wrong, then it's just guilt,
Okay.
at least in theory.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
So which one, if it's not exposed, let's say that I was hiding the fact that I'm a fentanyl addict, what is that the guilt that drives addiction? Which one is the one?
Well, no, that's a more complicated, that's a completely different
Okay.
topic. But most addictions have a strong element of shame, but that's what it would be toxic shame.
Okay.
And that is toxic shame is the emotion that comes from the belief that
Less than.
we're less than, we are defective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's what most addicts, that they're pretty much engaging in the addiction to counter the horrible feeling of feeling like they're defective.
Okay.
The emotion, the feeling, the emotion that comes from the emotion that comes from feeling defective.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's on that note, let's go to something positive.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at the emotion of joy. So happy, elated, and hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all over body, feeling lightness.
Mm-hmm.
So that's essentially joy, feeling of happiness, and that also drives that sense of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked in our self-care episode that when you're taking care of your needs, you have this feeling of abundance,
Mm-hmm.
and it's that feeling of abundance that that gives you hope.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the emotion of hope comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And gratitude.
Gratitude, yes, that it is part of. Again, we're not gonna have every single version or manifestation of the emotion here. These are just to give us some examples.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then let's move on to love. So,
I want to go over one that is important to me called joy pain. It's
okay, can we come back to that?
okay, fine. We'll go back to
let's, because that is important. That is important to everybody, and that is important recognizing it.
Mm-hmm.
But love involves affection, tenderness, compassion, and warmth. Those are different forms of love, and it helps to maybe get some definitions of love. And there have been a number over the years, philosophers, writers. I really appreciate uh, C.S. Lewis discussion on the different types of love,
Mm-hmm.
and but I really liked Scott Peck's definition of love,
Mm-hmm.
which is the act of promoting one's spiritual growth.
Mm.
So it can be self-love. I can promote my own spiritual growth. I can promote your spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm.
And also, when we're talking about spiritual growth, we're talking about every aspect of our reality.
Mm-hmm.
So physical health, emotional health, relationships, etc. And that really helped me get a good grasp on what the emotion of love is.
Mm-hmm.
And also that differentiates us that differentiates it from the act of love, because love is love there's the act of love and there's the emotion of love,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's feelings that are associated with love,
Yeah.
right? So let's look at the feelings. uh, Love, you feel swelling of the heart and warmth.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Mm-hmm.
so that's under love.
And that's quite different from the acts of love.
Right.
I want to make that very clear because that can be so confusing. I remember, our beloved Shelby when she passed
Our
away.
dog, yeah.
Well, the last year of her life was pretty difficult. I had to get up an extra 30 minutes every morning just to put her cocktail of medicine together and get it give it to her in just the perfect way that she liked it, and then take her out to potty, and then, go through her little routine and everything. And sometimes I wasn't feeling too loving at the time, but I also had to remind myself that just the act of doing that, and because, when somebody's in the end stage of life, it's
And
hard.
Shelby had dementia. So that was part of the problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's hard. Sometimes you go through that and you feel, and I would feel guilty for the way I felt about it later, and I had to remind myself that just going through those motions is love, You don't always feel love when you're changing your baby's diapers,
In the middle of the night.
in the middle of the night.
For the third time.
Exactly. And they're giggling at you.
They're giggling at you and you can barely keep your eyes open and you don't exactly feel loving, but you are engaging in an act of love.
Yes.
Right. So that is important to recognize those two different things.
Yeah.
But as you think about it in retrospect, you can actually feel love.
Yeah.
When you remember that.
Now I feel love thinking about it 16 years later, but
you're talking about the diaper change.
Yes, the diaper changes. Or even just now thinking about Shelby,
Right. So, and talking about Trinity, who's passed out right now because she's been sick, but when she was throwing up and you're having to clean that up, and her diarrhea as well, that's not exactly, you don't feel exactly loving as you're doing it, but
yeah, well, I felt kind of concerned, but if it continued for, like with Shelby, where it was for an entire year, every single day,
you start getting frustrated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that is important, the act of love versus the emotion of love.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they can be somewhat dissociated.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So now you wanted to talk about joy pain. So that's the emotion of joy coupled with the sadness, which is pain. So let's talk about that. When does that come on? When do we experience that?
Oh, most recently was our oldest son. Well, even our youngest son. There's especially when there's transitional stages and you watch them. Our oldest son just started law school, and it was pretty grueling. And he would describe being up till 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, studying, and then have to get up early in the morning, straight, just go straight into school, take a quiz, and not thinking he did very well, and he's not used to that kind of failure, and just the grueling aspect of the way the professors grill you, and it hurts to think of my son going through that and being embarrassed, and when he's being grilled by the professor and all that. But at the same time, there was this joy knowing that my son's hanging in. I'm already getting kind of welled up about it. But at the same time, now he's through that. He's gotten through the worst of it, and he's enjoying it. But I knew this day would come. And I know it's only going to get better. But he's also going to still have some hard times as he's going through all this. So I have joy pain as I watch him struggling, and I can't be there to rescue him, and I shouldn't be there to rescue him. But at the same time, I know that I have confidence in him that he's going to get out the other side, and he's going to. I can see you look kind of wide-eyed.
Because I'm coming to the realization you're talking about the concept of the good mother. The good mother always fails, right? And you're experiencing that joy pain now because you have to let your kids grow up. You have to let them go. And even then, it's painful that they have to go. Are we going to have to take a pause here?
Yeah, don't.
Let me, there, if that helps a little bit. So part of the concept of the good mother, as opposed to the devouring mother who doesn't let their kids grow up.
Yeah.
But the good mother lets them grow up, lets them fly the nest, and become adults of their own. And that is what you're describing, and you're experiencing joy pain that comes there. There's both the joy of watching them grow and the pain of his growing and no longer needing us, of leaving the nest, pretty much. And that's our firstborn.
Yeah.
He went off to college a few years back, but now it's like he's almost completely on his own. And to use more of a painful episode, it seems like, but to me it's like finally he's gonna be paying his own bills. And that's the difference between moms and dads. I'm going to be proud of him. He's paying his own bills. He's not going to lead
him. But I'm also, when he came home for the pandemic, there was a side of me that was like, ooh, get to snuggle him and hang out with him. And I didn't tell anybody about that, but
now you just told the whole world.
I know.
But the thing is that as a dad, I'm seeing him more, and this is more of the successful dad, right?
Yeah.
I am seeing him grow up and he's taking care of himself. And you, on the other hand, as a mother, as a good mother, you fail because you have to let him grow up. He's got to leave the nest. He can't stay here forever and be babied.
No, I can't.
Until he can get your grandchildren,
then I can baby them.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was actually a good example of the
joy pain,
of the experience of joy pain. I actually had some other ideas, but that was a better example.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay. So let's look just briefly at the gifts, and we'll wrap up this episode, and then we'll probably come back and talk a little bit more about shame in a different episode, because shame's a heavy subject. So what are the gifts? Here you can see the gifts on the right-hand column, gifts of anger. So we talked about assertiveness, right? Assertiveness, strength, and energy.
Yeah.
So when setting boundaries take a lot of energy.
Yes.
So when somebody is like pushing on your boundaries constantly,
Mm-hmm.
that's exhausting.
It is.
Trying to hold those boundaries up, it's a lot of work, and you need that anger to give you energy. And by anger, I don't mean rage or rudeness. Is that assertiveness that you're saying no? Like, uh, uh, I don't want to use some personal examples, um, but let's say you have and these are not our neighbors, but we've had neighbors in the past that were nosy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not currently, but in the past we had nosy neighbors and noisy neighbors,
Yeah.
but we had to keep them out of our business
Yeah.
as much as possible. And when they're constantly coming in and digging
Mm-hmm.
and trying to pry for information, and how many
Taking
different
your
ways?
water hose and
Yeah.
watering your.
Oh my gosh. But how many times do you have to tell them? How many different ways do you have to say no?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's exhausting.
Well, and that's why they call them great boundaries workout partners, because the more you get, and it does seem like a spiritual thing, but it seems like as you commit to suddenly, I'm going to start setting my boundaries, that spiritual workout partner is going to show up. I guarantee you. Your life was going, fine. And you think maybe I should learn to say no a little bit more. When you decide it's going to be that time, I guarantee you that nosy neighbor, that irritating coworker, the intrusive boss, uh, mother-in-law, whoever it is, it's going to be somebody that's going to test your ability to continue to set those boundaries and look at it as a blessing, not a curse, because you do need that practice. I remember when I set out with my girlfriends to do a Boundaries Bible study, a Townsend and Cloud workbook with them. Every single week, every single one of us had a serious boundary violation that we had to, and this went on for an entire year, and as soon as we ended the boundaries workshop, it was kind of like, well, I'm ready for anybody now. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. And let's look at the fear. So preservation. So these are the gifts of fear: preservation, wisdom, and protection. We talked about the flight or fight response, but fear also brings about wisdom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you realize that if you don't have to engage in behaviors that are harmful,
Mm-hmm.
and fear of having those, of engaging in that harm, is what is telling you don't do anything stupid,
Yeah.
right? So that's essentially where that comes from. So that's an important, very important emotion,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we're at a functional level.
Fear that's left unattended is what we call anxiety or stress.
Yes. So most of these emotions, the feelings, these experiences, these physical manifestations, are pretty much telling you, let me go to the physical manifestations, are are warning you of something that you need to be doing. So when we, or paying attention to, I should say. So fear, you feel in the stomach, the upper chest, and like you can't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly, we're talking to working with one of our couples, and one uh, the lady in this particular couple, um, she was having to, she was divorced, and she had to occasionally speak to her ex-husband,
Mm-hmm.
and or interact, I should say. And she was saying that every time she got in the vicinity,
Mm-hmm.
in a room or something that he was present, she felt like she was going to throw up.
Mm-hmm.
And she was worried. She was saying, how can I get rid of this?
Mm-hmm.
And what we sat down and we listened to the story, and we actually said, actually, I think that's your body telling you that you don't need to be around somebody who was very abusive to you.
Yeah.
Um, and that's when she realized, oh, she had an epiphany.
Mm.
She did not need to be around this person. She was feeling this panic attack, and she was also experiencing some shame around it. And her body was telling her, you don't need to be here.
Yeah.
You should not be around this predator. So that's why it's important to listen to our bodies. Her job was not to get rid of that feeling or those emotions. Her job was to not be around them.
Wasn't it John Bradshaw that said that emotions are God's megaphone saying, hey,
No, that's C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis? Oh, okay. Got
And that's pain.
Okay, pain.
Pain is God's megaphone.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's move down to pain. So the gift of pain, and people often don't think of pain as being beneficial, but speaking of the megaphone, healing, growth, awareness. So this is a great book, by the way. If you've never read The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis, it's not very long. It's worth every word, every letter.
Very deep, very deep.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the essence of pain, for example, think of a diabetic that has lost all the feeling in the feet. They step on a nail. They have no idea they did that. And that nail becomes infected. And weeks later, that foot becomes infected. Weeks later, they lose their foot because they didn't know that was there. So pain is an alarm. It's telling you something's wrong. It's telling you you need to pay attention to it. And it allows you to grow. So that's why they call it growing pains.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to pay attention to that emotion. And there is benefit to having those emotions.
Yeah, that old 80s philosophy, no pain, no gain, is not.
It's not wrong.
Yeah.
Well, doesn't mean you want to abuse yourself.
No, it is wrong.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what?
So in the gym in the 80s, we used to say no pain, no gain. And as I've gotten older, my trainer had to remind me to reverse that thought, especially after I had contracted rheumatoid arthritis after, burning the candles at both ends. So.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think there is benefit when we experience the pain and we attention. Of course, we're not going to go looking
for pain. Yeah.
That's not what it's about. But certain experiences are going to be painful and we have to go through them.
Yeah.
So, for example,
so in other words, what I'm saying is don't ignore the pain. Don't push it down. Don't try to push through it. Pain is the body's way of saying, pay attention. Something's going on. So that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Yeah. Not to try to avoid things that are painful, like, going to college or, things like those are going to be painful, but also don't force yourself to, just because you can take on more pain, to just keep, I guess there's balance there. Like you don't want to be an extremist, in other words. Like when I used to wear high heels and just tell myself to push through it, now I'm paying for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now I understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and as a physician, I do see that a lot of problems in the feet come from women wearing those pointy high heels.
Yeah.
That are very harmful to the toes.
Yeah.
But there are things that we have to go through that may or may not be painful, and we have to experience them.
Mm-hmm.
For example, being a teenager is very often teenagers themselves are not aware of the level of pain they're going through. But growing up is painful.
Yeah.
And we don't want to avoid being a teenager, going through all the acne and dealing with the
and bubble wrap
hormones.
Yeah.
And not
go fight all their battles for them.
There's actually harm
Yeah.
in not going through the process of growth.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's not what you're saying. You're saying don't do stupid things.
Yeah.
That may cause you unnecessary pain,
Yes.
but then there is growth that has to be experienced.
Yeah.
And it may be painful in the process.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to joy. So abundance, we talked about abundance, happiness, gratitude. Those are the gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Passion. So appetite, energy, and excitement. So one of the things that drove us to do this podcast is because we wanted to be able to reach more couples.
Mm-hmm.
We had been working locally, and we have been told more than once how we were told several times, why don't you write a book?
Mm-hmm.
And we've never gotten around to that. We may still do that, but I think this is more fun. I don't have the patience to sit down and write a book, although you might, and Jennifer's got great writing skills. But I don't quite have that patience. So this certainly is more up our alley to be doing this and try to reach more people in the process, right? Tell our story. And our therapist told us that you got to tell your story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And okay, I guess that's what I was saying is that we're passionate about this process. It gives us energy. It's driving us to do that, especially as we're getting close to, not exactly retirement, but we're winding down in our jobs, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay. Love, love, connection, life, spirituality.
Mm.
So remember what I said about Scott Peck's definition, promoting one's spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm.
And so love is important for connection,
mm-hmm.
and it's literally life-giving.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where those are the gifts of love.
Yeah.
And being able to have that connection not only with ourselves, but with our with God, with whatever your higher power is. But the way we see our relationship is sacred.
Mm-hmm.
The space between us is sacred. And that's how many people don't realize that we get closer to God within our relationship.
Yeah.
And our relationships in general, feeling that connectedness. And that is also what the concept of spirituality is having that connection to
mm-hmm.
to God and a higher power, right?
Yeah. And love, again, I want to reiterate that love isn't always a feeling. You know, I have friends that are taking care of elderly parents going through dementia.
And that's rough.
Yeah.
That's a lot of pain going through that. I witnessed that with my grandparents. And
your father now.
Yeah, now my father. So that is painful
mm-hmm.
and sad, but it's still love.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go over the gifts of guilt. We talked about values.
What, you skipped shame.
I know, I'm coming back to that.
Okay.
We'll come back. So I jumped over, I'm going to come back. So
okay.
Values.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about guilt is the experience of violating your own values.
Mm-hmm. If you want a real, and I've always had my employees on orientation flesh out their values. A lot. We live in a college town, and young people often, when you ask them point blank what their values are, they can't necessarily. They often have a hard time articulating it. So, and even people our age or older have a hard time articulating their values. But think about what you feel guilty about or really, really angers you. Well, the opposite of that would mean those are your values. The things that anger you, you value the opposite of that, or the things that you feel guilty about means that must have been something that you valued that you violated. So I always like to have people kind of flesh out their values, at least the first 5 of them, and really try to keep that in mind whenever you're just living your everyday life.
Yeah. Um, one more thing I want to say about that, since you brought up this concept. So having too many values, so to speak, that's not the right, that's not exactly correct. Having too many principles.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we should all have a set of principles that we live by, and um, if we have too many, then we get into what we used to call political correctness.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you need some very simple truths
Yes.
that guide your values, and there's the simplest one is the Ten Commandments, religious or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's the foundation for most of our principles and morality. But if you start getting into having 100 commandments,
Yeah, or 20, even 20 is a lot because then some of them start to conflict. Like, okay, well, I don't want to lie, but I also don't want to hurt people's feelings. Okay, well, then where do you draw the line there? So then it gets really complicated and then people just give up. And you don't want that either.
right?
So,
And you don't need more than those simple ones.
yeah.
So that's all you really need.
I mean, if you want to go into a philosophy class or a Bible study and really dive into those deep, or a book study and really think about them, but most people don't have the time.
Right. You can go deeper into each one of those, but you don't have to you don't have to create more
Yeah.
to the point that it gets absurd.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? Mm-hmm. So, for example, some people would say that is doggy abuse to put a turkey sweater on a chihuahua.
Hold, she's not feeling good.
So that would be political correctness. That the dog has fur, doesn't need that. But I think that's part of the point.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see. And then we're going to talk about shame. So humility, containment, and humanity. And I think those are the primary issues of shame, is that it tells us we're human.
Mm-hmm.
We're not God. We are not above everybody else. We are prone to make mistakes. We're not a mistake, but we are prone to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And that's being human.
Yeah.
And that's the emotion that shame is telling us. The shameless behavior, the shameless attitude, that means people think that they're God.
Mm-hmm.
And they create their own moral values as well.
Yeah.
And that's the most important part about shame. And we can really be damaged by this concept of toxic shame. Yeah. That John Bradshaw talked about. And
by the way, that's what when we refer to boundarylessness, that's
right. That is shamelessness is often driven by shamelessness.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing about shame is that there is plenty of research supporting that there in addictions, there's something of a shame cycle. Mm-hmm. So people experience such intense shame that something's wrong with me, something's fundamentally defective about me. Mm-hmm. So they want to eliminate that horrible feeling, and they medicate.
Yeah.
And then they feel better for a while. That wears off, and then they start feeling the shame again. So that's that shame cycle.
And by medicate, you mean self-medicate. In other words, right. They're medicating with their drug of choice. So
right, whatever that drug is.
Not typically by a doctor or not an ethical doctor.
Correct. So
That
alcohol, currently, uh, adult material. We don't want to use the word.
mm-hmm,
Um, so porn, sex, alcohol, those kind of things.
mm-hmm,
Uh, and they're easily accessible.
mm-hmm.
So that's how people often medicate. And yeah, they're gambling is, you said drug of choice.
Mm-hmm.
So gambling's another one because it drives dopamine. There's such a strong driver of dopamine.
So's food.
And food.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of shame around food.
And, a lot of the addictive additives in food, people often don't even have a choice. Because they're not even knowledgeable what is.
So you're saying choice, you mean control. They don't have control.
Yeah.
So we generally it's accepted that people don't have control over the addiction,
Mm-hmm.
but that we do have choices.
We do have
we do make choice to either get help or not.
Yes.
But control over the addiction, that's a different
that's
concept.
That's different. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think we're gonna wrap it up.
We were going to do a short little meditation, tuning into the body to learn to access those emotions that we were talking about. When we were talking about how the experience of anger, for example, is the feel of a flush or power and energy throughout the body, or joy is a feeling of lightness and levity in the body. A lot of times those seem almost like foreign concepts to people when we explain those for the first time. So this is meant to be just a little short intro into how to tune into those emotions and be mindful of them. So
a little bit. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm going to give Trinity to you, dear.
Okay, sure.
Okay. So, if you'd like to join us for this part of the episode, whoops. Okay. So, usually what I tell people is you can either, I tell most people, if you're not used to any kind of mindfulness or meditation, to first start with sitting. If you lay down, just be aware that most people end up falling asleep. So being cognizant of what's going on is probably the best choice at the moment, unless you've got limitations, pain of some sort. So let's first start by just putting the feet flat on the ground. If you're barefoot, that's even better. And then sitting up straight. You can even be cross-legged if that's really comfortable to you. But at any rate, sitting up straight with the spine straight. And then if it feels okay to you, close your eyes. If you're not going to close your eyes, just have a gentle, soft stare right in front of you. I'm going to go ahead and close my eyes and just begin to tune into your body, taking a nice deep breath in through the nose and then letting that go. Do one more breath in through the nose. Let the belly blow up like a balloon as you do. You can even put your hand on your belly so you can tune into that. And then let that breath go. One more breath in through the nose. And let that go. Now just begin to breathe normally. And now tuning into the body. Notice the top of your head. Feeling your face. Tuning into the back of your neck. And take note of all sensation as you're going through your body. And notice if there's any tightness as you continue down your shoulders, your arms, your chest. Notice the temperature on the surface of your skin, continuing to scan down your lower back and your abdomen, continuing through your hips and your upper legs. Pay attention to your joints as you're continuing down. Notice if there's any discomfort, any tension, any other sensations like tingling, kind of buzzing feeling, a lightness, a warmth, or cold. Continuing down through your ankles, your feet all the way to your toes. And now just try to tune in to any sort of sensation that you're getting. If you're feeling an irritation, that might come as sort of this feeling of wanting to escape or wanting to open your eyes or stop the meditation, turn off the episode, or maybe you're feeling relaxed, like you just want to sink into the chair or a little drowsy, especially if it's later at night. And go down those 8 different emotions that we spoke about. Anger, again, is that feeling of power and heat coursing throughout the body. Passion is kind of this tingling all over the body, and that's a different kind of power. You've got fear, which is a tightness in the shoulders and a tightness in the chest area. It can even be a tightness in the belly, a gnawing feeling. Guilt can be even more of a knots in the gut, and kind of a sickening, nauseous feeling. Shame is even more deeply into that. Now going into pain. Pain can be felt anywhere in the body, but especially in the abdomen or the spine. The sadness is what we're talking about here. It's even a deflated kind of feeling. And so just tune in to those different bodily sensations. And note what you feel. Now let's come back to ourselves, to our body, keeping a hold of that emotion that you were feeling, and begin to wiggle your toes and your hands, coming back into your present moment. And you can open your eyes, you can stretch and yawn, whatever feels good to you, and maybe even journal about that sensation if this was something new for you. And keep that in mind. Keep it in mind that it's always good to check in with the self, with the body, at least once a day. We even make a practice, or we used to make a practice of sitting around the table at dinner. We should get back to that. And just checking in with everybody, with our boys and ourselves, about our feelings throughout the day. So with that, I'm finished. Is there anything that you would like?
So, what is going to be our next
episode. Let's see.
So we're going to talk about shame or about attachment or, oh, family of origin was the other thing we're going to talk
Yeah,
about.
family of origin. Yeah, family of origin was next.
Yep.
So that should be very interesting.
And usually when we talk about family of origin, we mostly focus on family roles and how that affected us growing up and how it might even be affecting us today. So, okay. So Trinity is getting a little restless. She must be feeling better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She ate a little, so she should be feeling better.
Okay. So we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah. Have a great
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with those friends that may need help with boundaries.
Yeah.
What do you call it? Boundaryless friends?
Yes. And family. All right. Good night.
Good night.